Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our discussion on Norway super immunity 1641. As we've already discussed, there is a super immunity that has been conferred upon various distinct groups of people in terms of the global population. And this super immunity is very clearly what would be considered race-based immunity or phenotype-based immunity, and appears on the surface to be associated with levels of melanin. And so it looks like the more melanin that an individual has, the less likelihood that they will have this mutation, which is then conferring immunity to a variety of diseases. What's interesting about this is that you have this conferring of immunity for these distinct groups of people, and then you have individuals who are susceptible to certain microbes. And what's noteworthy is that although you have these distinct groups, primarily in Europe, that have this immunity, there seems to be a problem with having a prevalence of the diseases, the related diseases in the United States among those who would be considered brown, black Americans, American Indians, that particular people group. And so there's some odd relationship going on here with these individuals with this super immunity, and then this group of people in what would be considered the United States of America with this high level of vulnerability in terms of genetics. Now, what's noted is that the individuals with a high level of immunity have a high level of this mutation going on. And then you have the individuals who would be understood as African American, Brown American, Black American, American Indian in the United States, having a low level or no immunity when we're talking about the same dynamic, this same genetic dynamic related to that CCR5. And so we're just going to quickly delve into this so that we can see what the numbers look like specifically for Norway. Now, the numbers are different for different populations, but we're just going to quickly look at Norway and just one body of research. And so as you recall, the immune dynamic that we are talking about is that CCR5 delta 32. And what you have for Norway is a prevalence of 16.41% in terms of this mutation that confers this immunity. Now, you've probably heard the term herd immunity thrown around with respect to the current situation, and many people saw it as a false promise. However, it's not a false promise when you are dealing with a group of people who genetically are already predisposed to be immune. And so for those people, this is not a false promise. This is a reality for certain groups of people based upon this mutation that is conferring a high degree of immunity for a substantial portion of this particular population. So what the author is doing is comparing and contrasting Sweden and Norway in order to undergird this argument about or against this idea of herd immunity. And so in comparing and contrasting Norway and Sweden, what they came away with was that in terms of fatalities, Norway only had 5.23 per 100,000, and then Sweden had 58.12 per 100,000. Now, one of the things that the researcher did not talk about is the comparing and contrasting in terms of these immunity dynamics. Are the numbers substantially similar in terms of the CCR5 delta with respect to Sweden and Norway? What you're going to see in another piece that we're going to look at is that Norway is considered to have very high numbers in terms of this CCR5 delta. And so this article was looking at host genetics, and this is coming out of Cells. This is from 2019, and this researcher is out of the Center for Global Health and Diseases at Case Western Reserve. This researcher is pointing out something that has been obscured, ignored during this whole conversation with this situation, and that is about host factors, because each person is an individual with a unique genetic makeup. And so how each person is responding to this particular situation is going to vary from person to person. And then when you start to look at collectives, you're going to have collectives of people with similar genetics that are going to be responding to this situation in very different ways. For that reason, you cannot look at everyone as a monolith, and that is what has been taking place. And so you really can't look at everyone as a monolith when you have these host factors at play. And with respect to this CCR5 Delta 32, you have significant host factors at play, meaning the individual who is hosting the microbe, their bodies are reacting in different ways to the microbe, relating with the microbe in different ways based upon their individual genetics. And with respect to Norway, part of the dynamic is, a huge part of the dynamic is this resistance and immunity dynamic that they have that many other people around the globe do not have. And you can see some of this contrasting going on here with this population study. So there was a multi-population study with these donors from Norway and the Baltic states. And you also had some donors from Africa. What you see here, however, is that Norway had the highest level of this mutation frequency for the CCR5 Delta, and it was at 16.41%. And then you also see from two Baltic states, 15.63% and then 15.09%. And then you have these really low frequencies, almost non-existent. You see it's basically non-existent in Ethiopia. And then you have some other numbers related to other areas in the Scandinavian region, in that Isle region. There are some additional allele frequency dynamics going on related to race again with respect to another aspect of this CCR5 Delta mutation. Right now, however, we are just looking at Norway's superimmunity, and that's followed by the superimmunity of these two Baltic states. 16.41% is a pretty high number in terms of superimmunity for an ethnic group, for a population of people. One question to entertain, whether you are a layperson or whether you are a scientist looking at this dynamic, is where did this mutation come from? How old is this mutation? Because this is a very odd mutation that is very race-based, and it confers a very specific type of immunity that the majority of the world does not have. And so ultimately, when you are looking at the numbers, you have like that 1% that has this mutation and this immunity, and it is specifically, apparently, related to the degree of melanin in one's skin, and then a genetic lineage that confers this immunity. It's unclear where this genetic lineage came from because you have people who are now located in different places that have this immunity that are situated among populations that don't necessarily collectively have this immunity. So again, these are things to ponder. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.